Welcome back to the Film Box. If you are here for the first time, pull up a seat. This is where we crack a film open and go through it layer by layer, detail by detail, until you see it the way you were always meant to. And if you're a regular, you already know what's coming. Today we are opening a box that has been sealed for 5 long years. The Mortal Kombat franchise is back. The tournament has officially begun, and there is a lot to talk about. Because here's the thing about Mortal Kombat 2. It didn't arrive quietly. It arrived carrying the weight of every fan complaint about its predecessor, every promise made in interviews, every teaser that got the gaming community whispering. It arrived with Karl in sunglasses and a members-only jacket, one of the most iconic video game characters finally brought to life on screen, and a story that needed to be bigger, bloodier, and more faithful to the world that millions of people grew up with. The question wasn't whether it could be entertaining, the question was whether it could be something more than that. So let's open this up. Let's find out what's actually inside this box. Here's the one thing most people don't realize before they sit down for this film. Mortal Kombat 2 isn't just a sequel. It is, according to the people who built it, the middle chapter of a planned trilogy. Greg Russo, who co-wrote the 2020-21 original, told Collider that the vision for this reboot was always 3 films, structured deliberately. The first set before the tournament, the second set during it, and the third set after it. So everything you experience in this sequel, every sacrifice, every death, every inch of ground won and lost, is designed to be the meat of the story. This was never gonna be a film that finishes things. It was built to be the arena, and that changes how you watch it. Once you understand that, certain creative decisions that might frustrate you start to make more sense. The relentless forward momentum, the way characters are introduced and sometimes disposed of with alarming efficiency, the sense that the world is bigger than what fits on screen. This is a film that knows it is chapter 2 of 3. That's both its greatest strength and one of its most significant limitations. We'll come back to that. But before we go anywhere near the story, I want to do what we always do here at the Fin Box. I want to take you behind the lens first, because understanding how this box was built changes what you see when you open it. Let's start with the most important creative decision this film made. Karl Urban as Johnny Cage. Now, here's what most people miss. Johnny Cage was actually teased at the very end of the 2021 film. A poster, a name, a setup that left fans buzzing for years. And according to reporting from The Hollywood Reporter and Deadline, the character was already being discussed as a potential standalone focus. Well before the sequel was greenlit, Karl even was in final negotiations by May 2023, according to the Wrap. And this matters because the version of Johnny Cage that writer Jeremy Slater brought to the page is not the loud, narcissistic Hollywood brat from the classic games. This is a reinvention, a washed-up action star, a man who became famous for his fighting skills, packaged them into movies, and slowly watched those movies stop mattering. The creative choice to make Cage a fallen hero rather than a cocky idol was reportedly made specifically to give the character somewhere to go, an arc that the first films Cole Young never quite found. That decision alone reshaped what kind of film this was going to be. The second production fact that fundamentally changes your perspective on this film is the SAG-AFTRA strike. Principal photography began on June 22, 2020, at Village Roadshow Studios in Gold Coast, Queensland. Less than a month later, in mid-July, filming was suspended when the 2023 actors' strike stopped productions around the world. Mortal Kombat 2 sat on ice for roughly 4 months before cameras rolled again in November 2023, with the full shoot finally wrapping in late January 2024. That is a significant interruption in the creative momentum of any production. And when you watch certain connective tissue scenes in the film, the ones where the story feels like it's rushing to close a gap or bridge to ideas, there's a real argument that the strike's disruption left marks. It also means that the final film took nearly 2 full years from first camera to release date, going through post-production all the way into 2025 before landing on May 8, 2026. The patience required for that journey and the discipline required to maintain a coherent creative vision across that broken timeline deserves genuine acknowledgement. The third fact takes us to the screenplay. Jeremy Slater, known for his work on Moon Knight for Marvel, was handed the task of fixing the structural problems of the 2021 film while simultaneously delivering something more action forward and fan pleasing. In interviews ahead of release, Slater spoke openly about reading the fan feedback from the first film and using it as a blueprint. He reportedly wanted to lean into the tournament structure that the original games are built on, and he wanted the film's rhythm to feel more like progressing through rounds of a fighting game, a spate of combat, a moment of recalibration, another spate of combat, working upward through opponents until you reach the final boss. Whether he fully achieved that ambition is something we'll debate. But that structural goal, the deliberate attempt to make a film feel like playing through an arcade roster, is an idea worth holding on to as we move through the story. The fourth behind the scenes detail is about a face you might almost miss. Mortal Kombat co creator Ed Boon, the man who helped invent this entire universe back in 1992, has a cameo in this film as a bartender. It was reportedly kept quiet until about a month before release when it was confirmed publicly. This kind of detail isn't just a fun Easter egg for fans. It's a statement of intent from the filmmakers. It says, we know where this came from, we respect it, and we want the person who made it to feel at home in what we've built. Boon has been publicly supportive of the film adaptations, and having him physically present in the world he created carries a symbolic weight that goes beyond a simple wink at the audience. And the fifth production fact is about casting a villain, Martyn Ford, as Shao Kahn. Ford is a British former professional cricketer turned actor, standing 6 feet 8 inches tall, built like something carved out of a mountainside. The choice to cast a physically imposing non-traditional actor rather than relying purely on CGI or prosthetics for the franchise's most iconic villain was a clear signal from Mark Waid and his team. They wanted Shao Kahn to feel present, grounded, immovable. When Ford puts on that horned skull helmet and raises his warhammer, the threat isn't digital, it's physical. And according to behind the scenes posts from Ford himself, notably one posted just after the wrap party in January 2024, where he described the cast and crew turning up as strangers and leaving as family, there was a genuine warmth to this production despite its brutal subject matter. That human chemistry often bleeds through the screen in ways that even the best visual effects can't fake. Now that you know how the box was built, let's talk about what's inside it. Mortal Kombat II, released May 8, 2026, directed by Simon McQuoid, returning from the 2021 original. Written by Jeremy Slater, produced by James Wan, Todd Garner, and E. Bennett Walsh, with New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers Pictures distributing. The film runs 1 hour and 56 minutes. It is rated R, and this time around the film earns that rating with significantly less hesitation than its predecessor. The cast brings back Karl Urban as the newly introduced Johnny Cage, Adeline Rudolph as Princess Kitana, Jessica McNamee as Sonya Blade, Ludi Ling as Liu Kang, Mehad Brooks as Jax, Louis Tan as Cole Young, Josh Lawson as Kano, Tadanobu Asano as Raiden, Joe Taslim as Baihan, Hiroyuki Sanada as Hanzo Hasashi, and Shin Han as the scheming sorcerer Shang Tsung. New additions include Martyn Ford as the terrifying Shao Kahn, Tati Gabrielle as Jade, Desmond Chayam as King Gerard, Anna Thudwin as Queen Sindel, and Damon Herriman in the expanded role of the necromancer Quan Chi. This film exists because the 2021 original, despite its divisive reception among hardcore fans, was a genuine commercial success, particularly on HBO Max, where it became one of the platform's most watched titles. The first film's central controversy was its decision to build the story around Cole Young, a brand new character with no roots in the games. The sequel addresses that complaint directly. Cole Young is still present, but he's been demoted from protagonist to ensemble member. The spotlight now belongs to Johnny Cage and Kitana, two of the franchise's most beloved and iconic characters. This is a film made in direct response to feedback. It is at its heart a course correction. And the fascinating question, the one that makes this story worth examining, is whether a course correction made under that kind of pressure can still be a great film, or whether it ends up being a technically competent one that never quite finds its own identity. Here's my honest, spoiler free verdict before we go any further. Should you watch Mortal Kombat 2? Yes, but with the right expectations. If you come in wanting a faithful, entertaining, action packed adaptation of one of gaming's most iconic universes, with fights that deliver, a villain who genuinely intimidates, and Karl Urban doing something genuinely fun with one of the most recognizable characters in fighting game history, this film will reward you. If you come in wanting a layered, emotionally complex, narratively satisfying story with rich character development and thematic depth, it will leave you wanting more. It is a film that does exactly what it sets out to do, and yet somehow that still feels like a limitation. We'll get there. But first, let me tell you what it felt like to sit down with this film for the first time. I walked in expecting spectacle and got exactly that. But what I didn't expect, and what caught me off guard in the best possible way in those first 10 minutes, was the tone of the opening. The film begins in Edenia, and it begins with a fight that is stately, almost ceremonial. King Gerard facing Shao Kahn in combat with the fate of an entire realm on the line. There's a solemnity to it that doesn't feel like a video game. It feels like the opening of a myth. And then it cuts, hard, to a grainy VHS logo and the sound of scorpions rock you like a hurricane, and we're inside a scene from one of Johnny Cage's fictional B movies, all sideburns and sunglasses and gloriously oversized attitude. The tonal whiplash is immediate and intentional. McCoy is essentially saying, hold both of these things at once. This film is going to be both a genuine tragedy and a ridiculous circus. Whether you can hold those two registers simultaneously is going to determine whether you love this or merely like it. I liked the opening, I more than liked it. The Idania sequence has a weight to it that the first film never quite achieved, and the introduction of Johnny Cage through the lens of his own fictional movie is genuinely clever. It lets Urban establish the character's self mythology before we meet the real version underneath it. The wall this film creates in those first 10 minutes is a wall that knows it's absurd but refuses to apologize for it. There's a confidence in that, a commitment. And for a while, lighting that confidence is enough to carry you forward with a real sense of momentum. Here's where it gets layered though, because that confidence has limits. And when the film brushes up against those limits, it starts to show its seams. But we'll get to that in full. For now, you've seen how the box was built. You felt the energy of the room it opens into. Let's go inside. So the box is open. The world is established. And now it's time to go all the way through it, scene by scene, beat by beat, layer by layer. We're going deep today. This is the full story walkthrough, and I'm going to give you every turn, every decision, every moment that matters, along with what it all means. Because understanding what happens in a film is only half the job. Understanding why it happens, that's where the real conversation starts. Let's go back to that opening image. Edenia. Ancient. Beautiful. The kind of realm that looks like it was built before language existed. And there is King Gerard, a warrior and a ruler, a man who carries the dignity of his people in every movement he makes. He is fighting Shao Kahn, the warlord of Outworld, in single combat. Not by choice, but by the ancient rules of the tournament that governs the fate of realms. The rules are simple and merciless. Fight and win. Because if you lose, if Shao Kahn defeats your realm's champion 10 times, your world belongs to him. Forever. And Idania has lost its ninth fight. This is the 10th, the final one. And from the very first exchange of blows, you already feel the weight of what that means. Gerard fights brilliantly. He fights with everything he has. But there is something about Shao Kahn on screen, and this is entirely to Martyn Ford's credit, that makes defeat feel inevitable from the moment he appears. Ford is enormous, not in a digital, enhanced way, physically, genuinely enormous. and McQuaid films him with a kind of unhurried menace, letting Ford's sheer presence do half the work before a single blow lands. When Shao Kahn wins, and he always wins, it isn't just a loss for Gerard. It is the extinction of a world's sovereignty. And then comes the detail that defines the entire emotional architecture of this film. Shao Kahn doesn't just conquer Edenia, he takes Gerard's daughter, a small child with wide eyes and her father's grace. He takes Kitana and he decides to raise her as his own. Let me sit with that for a second, because it matters more than it might appear. This isn't just a villain being a villain. This is the film establishing its central human question from the very first scene. What does it do to a person to grow up as the daughter of the man who murdered your father? To be raised in the ideology of your own oppressor? To be trained by him, shaped by him, made into his greatest weapon? The film doesn't ask this question with words, it asks it with images. A small girl at a funeral, an emperor who looks at her and sees not a child but a tool, and then a cut years forward to a woman who has become the most lethal fighter in Outworld, moving through training sequences with a cold, controlled violence that looks almost like grief. Adeline Rudolph doesn't say much in the early sections of the film. She doesn't need to. Watch her eyes in the scenes with Shao Kahn. There is a performance happening there that is entirely in restraint, in the tension between what she feels and what she shows. Kitana has learned that showing nothing is the only way to survive, and Rudolph plays that psychological armor with a precision that makes the eventual cracks in it land so much harder. Now the film shifts. We leave the world of myth and prophecy and we land in something deliberately, comically mundane, a convention floor, folding tables, cardboard displays for movies nobody remembers. And there is Johnny Cage selling signed DVDs of his old films to three people. Karl Urban walks into this scene and immediately, completely owns it. He is a man performing confidence so hard that the performance has worn through. You can see the fatigue behind the smile. You can see a person who became famous for being extraordinary and has spent the subsequent years pretending that the ordinary world he's been left in is enough. Here's what I noticed on a second watch that most people miss on the first. Look at the specific titles on the DVDs Johnny is signing. They are all low-budget, straight-to-video action films with deliberately terrible names. But all of them feature Johnny doing stunts that, if you know what to look for, echo his excel abilities, moves that will eventually resurface in the tournament. The film is quietly telling you, right here in this convention scene, that everything Johnny thinks of as performance was always real. He just doesn't know it yet, and neither does anyone else. Sonya Blade is the one who finds him. Sonya has been working with Raiden, the thunder god and protector of Earthrealm, to identify and recruit the champions destined to fight in the tournament. And Sonya finding Johnny at a fan convention, trying to convince a man who makes his living planning to fight that he needs to do it for real is genuinely one of the funniest scenes in the film. Jessica Magnemi plays it perfectly straight, which makes Urban's reaction comedy work even better. Sonya is completely sincere, Johnny is completely bewildered. And between them is this gap. The gap between someone who already lives inside the reality of this world and someone who is just discovering that his entire understanding of reality has been wrong. And the film uses that gap for both humor and something approaching genuine feeling. Because underneath Johnny's resistance is not just disbelief, it's fear. The fear that if he actually commits to something real and discovers he isn't good enough, the illusion he has been protecting himself with will finally collapse. Raiden summons the full roster. And this is where the film shifts into a different gear, the assembly sequence where we rejoin the characters from the first film and establish where they are now. Liu Kang is still one of the most technically gifted fighters Earthrealm has ever produced, carrying the legacy of a lineage that traces back to Scorpion himself. Jax has rebuilt himself after the losses of the first film, his metal arms now fully integrated, his purpose sharpened. Sonya Blade is as controlled and methodical as ever, the closest thing this team has to a military strategist. And Cole Young is still present, still fighting, though the film's narrative gravity has clearly shifted away from him. Louis Tan does strong work with what he has, but the screenplay has repositioned Cole as one voice in an ensemble rather than the audience's primary window into the world. And then there is Kano. Josh Rosen's Kano is one of those performances that a lesser film would have wasted, but this film, to its credit, understands that Kano is most useful as a friction agent. He is a person in any room who refuses to take anything seriously, partly because taking things seriously is a vulnerability he has never learned to tolerate. His dynamic with Johnny Cage, once those two are in the same space, is genuinely electric. Two cynics in a world that requires sincerity, two performers in an environment that demands authenticity. Watching them circle each other, trade remarks, and gradually, reluctantly begin to respect each other is one of the quiet pleasures this film offers between the blood and thunder. But here's where it gets layered. Because before the tournament can fully begin, the film introduces a complication that changes the stakes in ways most viewers don't fully register on a first watch. Quan Chi, the necromancer, played by Damon Herriman, who was previously only heard as Kabal in the 2021 film and is here given a full physical presence. Quan Chi is working on behalf of Shao Kahn with a specific and terrible assignment. He is reaching into death and pulling warriors back out of it, not alive, not as themselves, as revenants, undead fighters stripped of their free will, their memories, their identities, refashioned entirely as weapons for outward. And the first names on his list are people the audience already knows and cares about. Kung Lao, Kano, two fighters from Earthrealm's previous encounters, now dragged back from whatever came after death and pointed directly at the people who once stood beside them. Think about what this does to the emotional landscape of the film. Every fighter on Earthrealm's side now has to carry the knowledge that dying isn't just losing. Dying might mean being turned against your own family, that the people you love might have to face your own face wearing someone else's intentions. It's a genuinely horrifying premise, and it adds a layer of psychological dread to the action sequences that pure physical danger could never achieve on its own. Every hit matters more. Every close call lands harder. Because the stakes aren't just survival, they're identity. Now the tournament begins. And the film commits to its structure with real discipline here, at least in the first half. The fights progress through escalating rounds, each encounter building on the last, the roster of opponents growing more dangerous as Earthrealm's champions advance. Mark Waid and cinematographer Stephen F. Windon filmed these sequences with a clear visual philosophy. Keep the geography legible, let the bodies tell the story, and find at least one moment in every fight that feels genuinely, physically impossible in the best possible way. The early tournament fights are the film at its most confident. There is an energy in them, a rhythm that feels lifted directly from the experience of playing through an arcade game's challenge ladder. You advance, you face someone harder, you find a way, you advance again. It's a simple loop, but it's satisfying in the way that great action cinema can be satisfying. Not because you're surprised by the structure, but because the execution within it is sharp enough to keep pulling you forward. Liu Kang's fights are technically extraordinary. Ludi Lin has clearly invested enormously in the physical preparation, and his combinations carry a fluidity that feels genuinely martial rather than choreographed. There is a moment midway through one of his bouts where he transitions from a traditional stance into something that appears to channel actual fire, and the film earns that visual because it has grounded the moment in enough physical reality beforehand that the supernatural layer feels like an escalation rather than a cheat. Liu Kang is the team's benchmark. He is what the others are measured against, and the film is aware of this, using his apparent invincibility as a setup for something that happens later that we'll return to in the spoiler section. Sonya's fights are different in texture and they should be. While Liu Kang fights with fluidity, Sonya fights with economy. Every movement has a purpose. She's not performing, she's solving problems. McNamee plays the combat sequences with the same directness she brings to the dialogue scenes, and there is a coherence to the character that holds across the film's shifting registers. The scene where Sonia faces Sindel, the queen of Edenia, now a servant of Shao Kahn, resurrected and turned against her own people, is one of the film's more visually inventive sequences, playing with verticality in a way that the earlier fights do not. Two women fighting over the ghost of a dead realm with genuine ferocity on both sides. It's a brief window into something the film might have been if it had slowed down more consistently. A story about what power does to women, about what loyalty means when the thing you were loyal to is gone. But then there is Jax, and Mehcad Brooks brings something to the Jax scenes that deserves specific attention. This is a character who, in the 2021 film, carried enormous emotional weight: the horror of losing his arms, the journey of rebuilding himself, the question of whether power offered in extraordinary circumstances comes at an extraordinary cost. In this film, Jax is whole. He is resolved. He has made his peace with what he is and what he carries. And that solidity becomes something almost architectural in the team's dynamic. He is the person others lean against when everything else is moving. The fight where Jax faces one of Shao Kahn's bruisers, a massive enforcer who fights with raw crushing power rather than technique, is less about acrobatics and more about endurance. It becomes a test of whether Jax can absorb punishment that would destroy anyone else and still find something in reserve. And the answer the film gives is physical and emotional simultaneously. He can. He always could. The metal arms aren't the source of that. They never were. Cole Young's arc in this film is honestly bittersweet. Louis Tan is a compelling physical performer, and he clearly wants to do justice to a character that was never going to be universally beloved. The film leans into Cole's lineage as Scorpion's descendant more explicitly here, giving him access to abilities that connect him to that legacy in ways the first film only gestured toward. There are moments where Cole genuinely feels like he belongs in this story's upper tier. But the structural decision to shift focus toward Cage and Kitana means Cole is perpetually being interrupted by the narrative, given a scene to establish his presence, then ushered aside to make room for the film's two leads. It's a trade-off the movie makes with clear eyes, but it is a trade-off and it costs something, because Cole was the emotional entry point for the audience of the first film. He was the one who didn't know he was special. He was the one who had to earn his place. And that role has now been handed wholesale to Johnny Cage. Which makes sense. Johnny is a far more entertaining version of that character. But it does mean that anyone who grew genuinely attached to Cole Young in the first film will feel the transfer of emotional investment somewhat abruptly. Now let's talk about the scene that is the film's first real turning point. Because somewhere around the midpoint, Mortal Kombat II does something unexpected. It slows down, not long, not dramatically, but for one scene, a scene between Johnny Cage and Raiden, set apart from the noise and blood of the tournament, the film stops performing and starts feeling. Johnny has it all. He is in this world, he is fighting in it, he is surviving it, but he still doesn't believe he belongs in it. It has Raiden, not with any particular eloquence, in the way real people actually say the things they most need to say, that he thinks he was chosen by accident, that whatever ancient cosmic mechanism selected him got its wires crossed, that he is surrounded by people who have actual power, actual gifts, actual purpose, and he is still just an actor who got good at hitting people and turned it into a career that is now definitively over. Tadanobu Asano's Raiden in this scene is restrained in a way that makes the moment work. He doesn't argue with Johnny. He doesn't reassure him with grand cosmic proclamations. He tells him something quiet and specific and true. You weren't chosen despite what you are. You were chosen because of it. Because a man with no power who chooses to fight anyway is something a god cannot manufacture. That is the thing Earth-Rel needs in this moment more than technique or fire or ice or any other gift. It needs someone who acts from choice when all choices look hopeless. It is a brief scene, maybe 2 minutes of screen time, and it is the moral center of the entire film. Urban plays the response to it with exactly the right kind of silence. The silence of someone who has heard something true and doesn't quite know what to do with it yet. The arc of Johnny Cage in this film hinges on that silence. Everything that happens afterward is the answer to it. From here, the tournament escalates. The film introduces Baraka, the leader of the Tarkatans, a fearsome warrior with retractable blades built into his arms, played here with fierce physicality and a strange, territorial dignity. The Tarkatan sequence is fascinating because it arrives as what initially appears to be an obstacle. Rodi needs a hidden entrance into Shao Kahn's fortress, and the Tarkatans know where it is. But the only way past Baraka is through him, and Johnny Cage is the one who has to do it. Look closer at this scene. Because the fight between Cage and Baraka is the film's most important action sequence that isn't the finale, it is explicitly constructed as a test of everything the Raiden scene set up. Johnny goes in underprepared, overconfident, and gets immediately destroyed. Baraka doesn't just beat him, he dominates him so completely that the gap between them feels unbridgeable. And this is exactly what had to happen. Because what the film needs is not Johnny winning when he should lose. What it needs is Johnny refusing to quit when quitting is the only rational option. The moment when Cage stops trying to fight like he's supposed to fight and starts fighting like himself, including the deployment of what longtime fans will recognize as one of the most iconic and deliberately ridiculous moves in fighting game history, a strike delivered exactly where you would expect Johnny Cage to deliver it, is the moment the film's comedy and its genuine heroism fuse completely. Baraka yields. Not because he has been outskilled, but because he has been outwilled. And in a world governed by the rules of Mortal Kombat, those two things turn out to be the same. Karl Urban in this sequence is simply excellent. He commits to the physical absurdity completely. The split, the timing, the specific expression of terrified determination on his face throughout, without ever winking at the camera. He is not playing a joke. He is playing a man who is genuinely trying everything he has and discovering, to his own surprise, that it is enough. That is a subtle and difficult balance to maintain across a sequence that could easily tip into pure farce, and Urban holds it without apparent effort. With Baraka's reluctant guidance, the team finds their way to Shao Kahn's fortress, and this is the moment the film changes everything. Because the fortress isn't just a physical location, it is the site of the tournament's endgame, and when Earthrealm's champions enter it, they discover that the conspiracy around the tournament has been deeper than anyone understood. Quan Chi has been working not just on the Revenant warriors, but on something more fundamental. He has been channeling stolen power through an amulet that Shao Kahn uses to amplify his already overwhelming strength. The amulet is the key. Destroy it and Kahn loses the edge that makes him effectively unbeatable. Keep it intact, and Earthrealm's champions will exhaust themselves fighting a version of Shao Kahn that cannot be defeated through skill or will alone. This creates a tactical split in the group. Some fighters hold the line, facing Revenant warriors including the heartbreaking figures of the corrupted Kung Lao and corrupted Kano, while Liu Kang, Jax, Sonya, and Johnny are tasked with reaching the amulet and breaking it. And simultaneously, Kitana, who has been beating toward her own confrontation throughout the entire film, makes her move against Shao Kahn directly. Let me take a moment here to talk about Jade. Tati Gabrielle plays Kitana's closest companion and fellow Outworld warrior, and the dynamic between them is one of the film's quietest pleasures. Jade has been raised in the same world as Kitana, shaped by the same ideology, fighting for the same emperor. But Jade is watching. She is aware of things Kitana is not yet ready to say out loud. There is a scene, brief, almost throwaway in its placement, where Jade makes a comment to Kitana about what it means to serve someone who owns you. The dialogue is paraphrased, the exchange is quick, but the implication lands like a stone. Jade is not loyal to Shao Kahn, she is loyal to Kitana. And the question of what Jade will do when those two loyalties finally come apart is one the film holds onto until the last act. The revelation that Jade has been protecting her own ability to choose, and that when the moment comes, she chooses Kitana, is not a surprise to anyone paying close attention. But the way the film states it, in the middle of the fortress confrontation, surrounded by chaos and consequence, gives it an emotional weight that goes beyond the plot mechanics. Two women who survived the same impossible childhood, making the same impossible choice from opposite sides of the same lie. It's a genuinely moving beat, and Gabrielle and Rudolph sell it with real chemistry. Now, here is where the story walkthrough reaches its precipice. Because Mortal Kombat 2 does something in its final act that very few blockbuster films have the nerve to do. It makes you pay for winning. Not in a nihilistic way, not in a way that denies its characters their victories, but in a way that refuses to pretend those victories come free. The price of saving Earthrealm in this film is not symbolic or metaphorical, it is specific, named, and permanent. And this is the moment the box opens completely. We'll hold the full details right there for the spoiler section. Because what the film does in its final 30 minutes deserves its own space. But before we go there, let's talk about what this film gets genuinely right. Because it gets several things very right indeed, and what it gets wrong, because both deserve to be said honestly. Starting with what it does brilliantly. Karl Urban, let's begin there because it's the most important single element of this film's success. The first film's core problem was that Cole Young never quite found the frequency the story needed him to occupy. He was created to be an audience surrogate, someone ordinary discovering an extraordinary world, and the execution was competent but rarely electric. Urban Johnny Cage does everything the first film needed Cole to do, and then adds something else entirely. He adds joy, not happiness. There is a distinction. Johnny Cage is not a happy man when we meet him. He is deeply, specifically, quietly sad. But there is a joy in his fighting spirit, a delight in the absurdity of the situation he finds himself in, a refusal to let the weight of it extinguish him, that makes every scene he occupies lighter and more alive. Evan has spent a career playing men defined by their competence. Red, Billy Butcher, Bones McCoy, Scourge. But here he is playing a man who has been defined by a competence he can no longer demonstrate, and whose rediscovery of it is gradual and earned and sometimes funny and sometimes genuinely moving. This is one of Urban's best performances in a franchise context. That is not a small statement. The scene that proves it most definitively is in the Baraka fight, though that is extraordinary. It is a much quieter moment. A scene between Johnny and Sonia on the night before the final assault on Shao Kahn's fortress. The film gives them a moment of stillness amid the noise, and in it, Johnny admits something that the character has been cycling for the entire runtime. He tells Sonia that he used to think becoming famous was the same as becoming real, that being seen by enough people meant you existed in a way that mattered. And losing the fame didn't just cost him his career, it made him feel like he was disappearing. Urban delivers this as a man who is not asking for sympathy. He is simply telling the truth out loud, possibly for the first time because the proximity to death has made pretending feel exhausting. And Martyn's response, not comforting, not dismissive, but simply honest in return, is exactly right. This scene is not in the video game. It didn't need to be. It is the best thing Jeremy Slater put in this screenplay, and it is the moment the film urges emotionally center. Beyond Urban, the story construction in the first half of the film is genuinely disciplined. The decision to use the tournament structure not just as an action delivery mechanism but as a philosophical framework. A world where the fundamental question is always what you are willing to lose to save something larger than yourself gives the film a moral architecture that its predecessor largely lacked. Every fight in the tournament has stakes that extend beyond the physical outcome. Yu Kang fighting as the carrier of a lineage, Jax fighting as an act of definition, Sonia fighting as the only form of justice available to her in a world where normal justice cannot reach. The fights mean something before the first blow lands. That is a screenwriting accomplishment worth noting. McCoy's direction is most impressive in the wide compositions, the shots that establish scale and geography rather than the close-in action. The approach to Shao Kahn's fortress in the third act is legitimately gorgeous, rendered with a production design that goes big on scale without losing the sense of threat that Martyn Ford's physical presence establishes. The fortress feels like an extension of Kahn himself, overwhelming, angular, built to crush rather than impress. The color palette shifts here from the warmer, dustier tones of the tournament arena to something colder and more metallic, and that visual transition works as a narrative signal. We are now in Shao Kahn's world. The rules of survival just changed. The music deserves genuine recognition as well. The score, balancing the operatic weight of the tournament mythology with periodic deliberate injections of the original Mortal Kombat electronic theme, is handled with far more intelligence than you might expect from a film of this type. The classic theme doesn't appear often, but when it does, the film earns it. The moments where that synthesizer riff surfaces are moments where the story has specifically delivered something the franchise has been building toward for years, and the music's arrival functions as confirmation rather than decoration. It says, yes, this is what it was always about. Adeline Rudolph deserves her own paragraph. She's carrying a co-lead role in a major action franchise with no significant precedent to draw on, playing a character who needs to operate simultaneously in the registers of grief, rage, discipline, and crucially, the slow, dangerous awakening of something like hope. Rudolph does not make Kitana soft. She does not give her the kind of warmth that reads as reassurance. Instead, she makes her exact, every emotion precisely calibrated, arriving and departing without surplus. The final sequence between Kitana and Shao Kahn is the film's emotional terminus, and Rudolph earns it entirely. She's a find. Whatever this franchise does next, it needs to put Kitana at the center of it. The one scene in this film that is completely unforgettable, the one that will live in this franchise's memory as a defining image, is the moment when Kitana, alone, faces Shao Kahn in the ruins of a fight that has cost both of them everything, and performs the final act of the tournament with her fan blades. The shot composition is extraordinary, the silence before the action, the specific way Rudolph holds her body in the instant before she moves. Still, perfectly still, like something that has been waiting its entire life for this moment, and then the release. The violence is precise. It is not triumphant in the way action cinema usually quotes triumph. It is something more complicated and more true. It is the settling of a debt that was written before she was old enough to speak, and the film understands that. The camera holds on Rudolph's face afterward, not for applause, but for reckoning. Now, turning to the honest criticism, because this film has real flaws and they need to be named fairly. The pacing in the second act falls apart in a way that is genuinely damaging to the film's momentum. After the strong structural discipline of the first half, the escalating tournament rounds, the careful balancing of character moments between action sequences, the film hits a section roughly between the Takatan detour and the fortress approach where it appears to lose confidence in its own rhythm. There are scenes here that feel like connective tissue without the connective tissue. Moments that are clearly bridging two story beats but haven't been given enough material to make the bridge interesting. The exposition sequences, where characters explain the rules of the amulet and the mechanics of Shao Kahn's immortality scheme, are particularly guilty of this. They are functional, they deliver information, but they deliver it in a way that feels like obligation rather than craft. The film has worked so hard to establish a world with genuine atmosphere, and in these passages it briefly becomes the kind of blockbuster that seems allergic to silence and nuance in equal measure. Related to this is the underdevelopment of Queen Sindel. Anna Tunyoon has real presence, and the character's situation is one of the most emotionally loaded in the entire mythology. Sindel was a queen, her husband was murdered, her realm was taken, her daughter was stolen, and she was raised, corrupted, bent into a weapon against the very people she should have been fighting beside. This is a devastating backstory. This is the kind of material that, in a different version of this film, could have produced one of the year's great villain performances. Instead, Sindel is introduced, deployed in the Sonya fight sequence, and disposed of before the audience has been given nearly enough time to understand what she represents or what her loss means. It is the film's biggest wasted opportunity, not because the execution of the scene she has is poor, but because she deserves so much more than one scene. The Revenant versions of Kung Lao and Kano present a different kind of problem. The emotional potential of these two characters, People who are once on Earth else now forced to fight against people who respected and in some cases loved them is the most psychologically rich premise the film has access to. And the film does acknowledge this, but it acknowledges it briefly in ways that get swept aside by the forward momentum of the plot. Mark Wong as Kung Lao and Josh Lawson as Kano both do what they can with the material available to them, but the film doesn't linger long enough in the horror and heartbreak of what it means to face a revenant. The fights against them feel like obstacles being cleared rather than genuine confrontations with something devastating. A braver version of this film would have let those confrontations breed more, even at the cost of action efficiency. There is also a logic problem in the film's third act that a section of the audience will latch onto and refuse to let go of. The access to Shao Kahn's fortress, once the Tarkatan tunnel is revealed, is treated as though it should be straightforwardly exploitable. The fortress has a single entry point below it, and the film's characters use this as though a warlord who has conquered multiple realms would leave that vulnerability unguarded. The film makes internal sense up to a point, and then relies on the plot, needing the heroes to succeed more than it relies on the geography of the situation making genuine strategic sense. For viewers who engage with action themes primarily through the lens of physical logic, who does what, where, and whether the rules hold, this will create a nagging dissatisfaction that no amount of spectacle will fully resolve. And then there is Cole Young, and here I want to be careful and fair because Louis Tan is a good actor and Cole Young is not a bad character. But the film's decision to use Cole's fate the way it does, in the specific way it does, which we'll discuss fully in the spoiler section, feels like a choice made more for narrative utility than for genuine emotional impact. It is a kind of decision that a film makes when it needs to raise stakes quickly and doesn't have the infrastructure already built to make the sacrifice land the way it should. Cole deserved better. So did the audience that came to this film having spent 3 years with him in the first one. There is something almost administrative about the way his story resolves here, and administrative is the last word you want associated with a moment that is supposed to crack your heart open. The final criticism, and this is perhaps the most significant structural one, is that Mortal Kombat 2 said never quite decides whether it is a film about fighting or a film about what fighting costs. It reaches for both, and it achieves both intermittently, but it never fully commits to either one at the expense of the other. The result is a film that is more satisfying than the sum of its frustrations and less profound than the sum of its inspirations. It is a film that had the ingredients to be something genuinely great. The cast, the mythology, the production resources, the corrected structural foundation, and chose to be something reliably good instead. That is not a condemnation. Reliably good is not nothing. But it is an honest accounting of where the ambition ends and the competence takes over. The film that Mortal Kombat 2 could have been was playing in the spaces between its best scenes, in the Raiden and Cage conversation, in the Kitana and Jade quiet moments, in the stillness before Urban's greatest physical sequences, in the agonizing potential of a character like Sindel who arrives and vanishes too quickly. The film that actually exists is compelling, frequently exciting, occasionally moving, and ultimately a little less than it promised. My personal rating lands at 6.3 out of 10. And I mean that number with genuine respect, because a 6.3 here means a film that tried to do something real, partially achieved it, and left you wanting more in both the best and the most frustrating senses of that phrase. So we've been through the story, we've gone through what this film gets right and what it doesn't. And now I want to step back the way you sometimes have to step back from a painting to understand what it's actually doing and look at where this film arrived from. Because a film doesn't exist in a vacuum. A film exists in a moment. And the moment that Mortal Kombat 2 arrived into tells us something important about why it made the choices it made, why audiences received it the way they did, and what it means that this franchise is still standing, still fighting, still trying to be something more than it is given credit for. So let's talk about the world this film walked into. When the 2021 reboot of Mortal Kombat landed, the context was extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with the film itself. It released simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max during one of the most disrupted periods in cinema history. A global pandemic had fundamentally altered the relationship between audiences and the theatrical experience, and the studios were still scrambling to understand what that meant for their release strategies, their business models, and their creative decisions. The 2021 film benefited enormously from that context. People were at home, they were hungry for spectacle, they were willing to forgive structural imperfections in exchange for something loud and colorful and alive, and the film delivered that. Not brilliantly, but enough. Its HBO Max numbers were reportedly staggering, and the cultural conversation around it, particularly around the character of Sub-Zero and the relationship between Scorpion and Bi-Han, was more engaged than anyone predicted. Mortal Kombat II second based into a completely different moment. Theaters have recovered. The hybrid release model has largely given way to a return to theatrical windows as studios recommitted to the cinema experience after years of volatile experimentation. This film released on May 8, 2026 in theaters only. No simultaneous streaming, which is both a statement of confidence and a strategic gamble. The franchise that found its second life on streaming is now asking audiences to come back to the multiplex for it. And in its opening weekend, the early box office report suggests a moderate but not spectacular response. $65 million worldwide in its first week is not a failure, but for a film with this budget and this IP, it is not a triumph either. It is a holding action, a film that keeps the franchise alive without decisively expanding its reach. The critical reception has been, and here is an honest accounting, broadly consistent with my own personal verdict. Rotten Tomatoes shows a 64% approval rating from critics based on over 115 reviews. The consensus language, according to Screen Dollars, describes the film as delivering on action while falling short on story. That is an accurate summary. What it misses is the texture of the critical conversation beneath the aggregate number because the spread of critic responses is genuinely interesting. Action-specific critics, reviewers who primarily cover genre cinema, have been considerably more generous, frequently landing in the 7 to 8 range and praising the tournament structure and Karl specifically. General film critics working from a broader set of expectations have been cooler, several noting, as Owen Gleiberman did in Variety, that the film is an old-school video game trash extravaganza, all sound and fury and flying bodies and jargony world-building, propped up by a sludgy excuse for a story. The gap between those two responses tells you something important. This film is genuinely excellent at one thing, and the debate is about whether that one thing is enough. Audience response has been notably warmer than critical response. This gap between critic scores and audience scores is not unusual for franchise action cinema, but it is more pronounced here than in most comparable films. Fan communities have responded to the corrections made from the 2021 original with genuine appreciation. The return of the tournament structure, the introduction of Johnny Cage as a lead, the inclusion of franchise-specific details, Baraka, Quan Chi, the Revenant mythology, the fatalities performed with full commitment. These are details that mean something specific to people who have been playing this franchise since the 1990s. They are details that read as fan service to critics and as respect to fans. Both assessments are accurate, they are not mutually exclusive. The UCST Guardian review, one of the more thoughtful critical responses in the early wave, put it well when it noted that the film practically trips over itself in its attempts to rectify the errors of its predecessor, resulting in greater entertainment value but suffering from the same stylistic and formal mistakes. That is a precise diagnosis. The film solved the right problems and brought some of the wrong habits along with it. The cultural conversation around Mortal Kombat II is also inseparable from the broader conversation about video game adaptations in this era of cinema. The last several years have produced a genuinely remarkable shift in how game-to-film translations are received. The Last of Us on television set a new standard for emotional fidelity to source material, and the Sonic films found a commercial formula for beloved character translations that prioritized audience warmth over critical legitimacy. Mortal Kombat II sits in a more complicated position. It is neither trying to be a prestige adaptation nor a pure crowd pleaser. It is trying to be a legitimate action franchise with genuine emotional stakes built on top of a game universe that has never been especially character driven. The games themselves are built around fighting mechanics and fatalities and spectacular finishers, not around human psychology or narrative complexity. The film is trying to give depth to characters whose original purpose was to deliver iconic moves and die memorably. That is an inherently difficult task, and the film deserves credit for attempting it even when it doesn't fully succeed. There are no awards considerations for this film. That is stated plainly, not dismissively. Mortal Kombat II is not award cinema, does not present itself as award cinema, and would be poorly served by being evaluated against that standard. What it deserves to be measured against is the best the action franchise genre can achieve. Films like Mad Max, Fury Road, that redefined what spectacle cinema could mean, or the John Wick series that found a way to make pure action cinema philosophically coherent. Against those benchmarks, Mortal Kombat 2 falls short. Against the benchmarks of its own franchise history. The 1995 original, the universally derided Annihilation sequel, The Long Wilderness Years, it is a genuine step forward. Context matters when you're talking about what a film accomplishes. There's also the question of what this film is building toward. Because the announcement at New York Comic Con in October 2005 that a third film is in development with Jeremy Slater returning as screenwriter changes how Mortal Kombat 2 should be understood, not just as a standalone experience, but as the middle of a structure. And this film ends in a specific way, at a specific emotional cost, that sets up the third chapter with a clarity that the mid-film wobbles could not entirely undermine. Where the story ends, and we will cover this in full in the spoiler section, positions the surviving characters in a state of genuine transition. The victory has been won, and the price paid for it has changed everyone who paid it. That is the architecture of a second act. And whatever its limitations, Mortal Kombat 2 fulfills that architectural function with real commitment. Its streaming life is just beginning. Not yet on any platform as of this recording, the theatrical window is still open. But when it lands on a streaming service, it will find an audience that will receive it with considerably more patience and generosity than the theatrical rush allows. The films that are built around tournament-style action sequences, films where pausing, rewatching, and catching the details is part of the pleasure, tend to live well on streaming. The Easter eggs, the cameos, the background fighters with names that hardcore fans will recognize, the subtle visual foreshadowing of plot points several scenes before they arrive. All of this plays better on a second watch in a living room than it does on a first watch in a cinema. Mortal Kombat 2 is a film that will be better loved in 6 months than it is today. That is not a criticism of the theatrical experience, it is an observation about the kind of film this is. As for whether it feels timeless or perfectly of its era, I think it is emphatically of its era. The film is shaped by specific anxieties and enthusiasms that belong to this moment in cinema. The concern about franchise fatigue, the need to demonstrate fan loyalty while simultaneously expanding the audience, the particular challenge of serving nostalgic affection and contemporary relevance simultaneously are. A film made in a different moment with the same material would make different choices. These films' choices are marked by the circumstances of their making. The SAG-AFTRA strike, the shifting streaming landscape, the post-pandemic renegotiation of what audiences want from a cinema experience, all of it is in the texture of this film if you know where to look. It may not be timeless, but it is honest. And sometimes honesty is more valuable than timelessness. Now I want to go somewhere deeper. Because underneath the tournament structure and the fatalities and the incredible physical performances, there is something this film is actually trying to say. And I think most people miss it on the first watch because the surface is so loud. Let's find the quieter thing beneath the noise. Mortal Kombat II is at its deepest level a film about the danger of believing that power defines worth. Think about every character in this story and how they are positioned in relation to that idea. Shao Kahn is its most obvious embodiment, a being who has equated his own dominance with his own existence so completely that he cannot imagine a version of himself that does not rule everything he touches. His power is not separate from his identity, it is his identity. And the film understands that this is not just a political problem, it is a psychological one. Shao Kahn cannot be negotiated with because there is no version of peace that doesn't require him to become someone he no longer knows how to be. The warhammer he carries everywhere, even in conversations where it is unnecessary, is not just a weapon, it is a self portrait. A man who has to hold his power visibly at all times to remember that it is real. And then look at the characters positioned against him. Liu Kang has extraordinary power, genuine supernatural fighting ability, and the film is careful to show us that this power has never made Liu Kang feel certain. He trains harder than anyone who has less ability than him because he understands that power without purpose is just violence. Jax carries physical power in the most literal possible sense. The strength of his rebuilt body is greater than any ordinary human, and yet the film positions him as the team's conscience, the person most aware of what it costs to use what you have. Even Sonya, whose abilities are tactical and strategic rather than supernatural, is defined by the discipline she exercises over her own capabilities rather than the capabilities themselves. And then there is Johnny Cage, the man with no power, the man who has spent his entire career performing strength he actually had and then lost even the performance. Johnny's arc in this film is not just about finding his courage. It is about discovering that courage and power are not the same category, that you can be powerless and still choose. That choosing, genuine, costly, irreversible choosing, is a form of agency that power cannot grant and cannot take away. When Johnny faces Baraka with no particular advantage, when he faces the fortress with no particular gift, when he ultimately faces the moment where his friends need him to be the thing Raiden said he was, he doesn't suddenly acquire power. He acquires clarity. And the film suggests quietly and with real conviction that clarity in the moment of maximum fear is something more rare and more valuable than any arcana. This connects directly to Kitana's story. Because Kitana has power, extraordinary power, and she has spent her entire life being told by the men who stole her that this power is his to deploy. Shao Kahn raised her to be a weapon. He shaped her abilities to serve his agenda, and the film's most radical emotional gesture is the moment when Kitana decides that her power belongs to her, not to her adoptive father, not to Earthrealm, not to the tournament and its rules, to her. The final confrontation between Kitana and Shao Kahn is not about whether she can defeat him. It is about whether she is willing to accept that she is the one who gets to decide what her abilities are for. That is not a small thing. That is the question the film has been building since the very first image. That small girl watching her real father fall. And the answer it gives in the final act is earned through every quiet scene and every brutal fight that preceded it. There is also something worth sitting with in the Revenant storyline, because the idea of a Revenant, a dead warrior stripped of their will and turned into someone else's weapon, is not just a fantasy horror concept. It is a metaphor for something that happens in the real world with devastating regularity. The people who were once themselves, who had their own convictions and loyalties and loves, and who are now hollowed out and redirected by trauma, by coercion, by systems of power that found ways to use their strengths against the people they once protected. The Remnant Kung Lao is not just a tragic plot device. He is an image of what institutional violence does to individuals over time. He is what happens when power takes a person and uses them so completely that the person is no longer distinguishable from the use, and the film has the courage to not fully resolve this. The revenants are defeated, but they are not restored in this film. Their people are dead. Their free will is still gone. The victory over them is tactical, not redemptive. That is a honest and uncomfortable note to hold, and the film holds it. What does this connect to in your life? Here is where I want to be honest rather than abstract, because that's what this channel is for. The question this film is really asking, beneath the hammer swings and the fan blades and the cosmic tournament rules, is a question everyone faces in their own version. Whose idea of you are you living out? Whose definition of your worth are you carrying around? Shao Kahn is an emperor in a fantasy realm, but there are smaller versions of Shao Kahn in every life. The person who told you what you were worth before you were old enough to argue with them. The system that decided what you were for before you understood that you had a say. Kitana's journey is a fantasy journey, and it is also a profoundly human one. It is the journey of finding out that the person who raised you was wrong about you, and that the hardest part of that discovery is not the confrontation, it's the moment before it. The moment when you decide to believe that you are allowed to decide. And Johnny Cage, the man who has nothing special about him except that he refuses to pretend failure, is a permanent verdict. Is every person who has ever been in a room full of people who seem to know exactly what they're doing and quietly wondered if they were the only one who didn't. Arben plays this with such unguarded honesty that it reaches past the absurdity of the context and connects with something true. You don't need arcana. You don't need a lineage or a prophecy or a dragon marking. You need the thing Ridin named, which is simply the willingness to act when acting costs everything. Most of us will never fight in a supernatural tournament, but most of us will face a version of the moment where we have nothing left but the choice itself. And what we do in that moment, that is the only question this film is actually asking. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you will want to experience it fresh. Still here? Good. Then let's go all the way in. Because the full spoiler breakdown of Mortal Kombat 2 is where this film becomes genuinely fascinating to talk about. Not because everything works, but because the choices it makes in the final act are bold in ways that demand proper examination. Let's go back to the beginning of the end. Quan Chi, the necromancer. We have established his function in the story, pulling dead warriors back as revenants, directing them against Earthrealm's champions. But what the film reveals as the fortress confrontation develops is that Quan Chi's revenant program is not just a military tactic, it is a theological one. Quan Chi has been drawing power from the Netherrealm, the place where warriors go when they die in this mythology, and the act of pulling revenants back into the living world creates a conduit between those two realms. The amulet that Shao Kahn uses to amplify his power is not just charged with stolen fighting ability, it is charged with Netherrealm energy, which means that as long as the amulet exists, Shao Kahn is not just a powerful mortal. He is partially anchored to something that death cannot touch. He is in the precise terminology the film uses, drawing on a form of borrowed immortality. This is a critical piece of information that the film delivers in the middle of the third act in a way that could easily slip past you on a first watch, because it changes the nature of the final confrontation fundamentally. Earthrealm's champions are not just trying to defeat Shao Kahn, they are trying to sever his connection to an energy source that makes defeating him physically almost meaningless. You can beat him down, you can overpower him, but as long as that amulet is intact, he gets back up, because he has borrowed permanence from a realm where permanence is the only currency. The decision to split the team here is the film's most structurally consequential choice. While Liu Kang, Jax, Sonya, and Johnny push toward the amulet through a different route, the remaining fighters hold the line in the fortress corridors against the revenant warriors. And this is where the film commits to the emotional cost I mentioned earlier, because in those corridors, fighting people they once knew and in some cases loved, two members of Earthrealm's team die. Cole Young dies here. Let me be precise about how and why, because precision matters when we are talking about a death that should mean something. Cole is facing the Revenant version of Kung Lao. The Revenant Kung Lao has all of Kung Lao's technical brilliance, and none of his restraint, none of the moral hesitation that made Kung Lao a champion rather than a killer. And Cole, who has always fought with an edge of self-doubt that his abilities couldn't fully resolve, faces this corrupted version of someone who died in service of the same cause Cole is fighting for. And it is that weight, The weight of what Kung Lao became, the implication of what Cole himself might become, that costs him the fraction of the second he can't afford to lose. I want to be careful here because this death is the film's most controversial creative decision and it deserves a fair accounting. There are two ways to read what the film does with Ko. The first reading is that it is a genuinely brave storytelling choice, killing a lead character from the previous film to signal that this sequel is not playing by the rules of franchise safety, that the stakes are real and the costs are permanent, and that the world of Mortal Kombat is not one where being the protagonist protects you. The second reading, the more uncomfortable one, is that Cole's death functions primarily as a mechanism to justify the emotional weight of the final act rather than as a genuine character conclusion. That it is the film choosing the most efficient path to raise stakes rather than the most honest path. Both readings are true simultaneously. The death works as a plot beat and fails as a character beat, and which of those two things you feel more strongly is going to determine whether this moment hits you the way the film intends. Louis Tan is given almost nothing to do in the moment itself, and that is the real trouble. Not that Cole dies. Deaths in films can be extraordinarily powerful, even for beloved characters, but that he dies without the preparation the moment needed. There is no final conversation. There is no look between Cole and Sonya or Cole and Liu Kang that acknowledges what he means to them. There is no moment where Cole gets to be the author of his own ending rather than a victim of the plot's requirements. He dies in a corridor in the middle of a fight that the film is already moving past, and the camera acknowledges it briefly before moving on to the next obstacle. For a character who was the heart of the first film, who carried the emotional load of an entire 2 hour story, this is a form of narrative abandonment, and it is the film's most significant moral failure toward its own characters. Revenant Kano is a different story, and here the film actually handles the emotional complexity with more care. Josh Lawson plays both versions of Kano in this film, the anarchic, self-interested original and the hollowed-out, will-stripped Revenant, and the contrast is genuinely disturbing. Because what makes Kano distinctive as a character is his relentless, almost pathological individuality. His refusal to belong to any side, his contempt for anyone who takes themselves seriously, his specific brand of chaotic self-determination. The Revenant Kano has none of this. Same face, same voice, same physical capability. But the light behind the eyes is gone, replaced by something flat and purposeless. A tool that used to be a person. The scene where Johnny Cage faces the Revenant Kano is the film's most genuinely chilling moment that isn't a fatality. Because Johnny has spent the middle of this film in an unexpected, unwilling rapport with Kano. Two cynics finding a kind of rough, honest connection in their shared reluctance to be heroes, and now he has to face what Kano has become. Urban plays the recognition and the horror of it in complete silence. There is no quip, there is no sardonic comment. There is just Johnny looking at something that used to be a person and understanding visibly what the cost of failure in this world actually looks like. The fight that follows is not triumphant. Johnny wins, but he wins the way you win when winning still feels like a loss. And after it is over, after the Revenant Kano has been defeated and lies still, the film gives Urban one more beat. A long hell moment where Johnny stands over what he used to be a man he liked, in a context that would have seemed impossibly absurd to him a week ago, and simply bleeds. No music, no dialogue, just the sound of the fortress and the breath of a man who is still alive and not entirely sure how to feel about it. This is the film at its absolute best. This is the version of Mortal Kombat II that deserved to be the whole film. Meanwhile, in the parallel track, the push toward the amulet is where the film deploys its best ensemble action sequence. Liu Kang, Jax, Sonya, and Johnny moving through the fortress's interior toward the chamber where Shao Kahn stores the amulet is staged with real spatial intelligence. McQuaid and Windon use the architecture of the fortress, its narrow passages, its sudden vertical drops, its mixture of ancient stone and constructed brutality, to create a sequence that feels tactically coherent rather than just viscerally exciting. You understand where everyone is, you understand what everyone is trying to do. And the obstacles that arrive, waves of outward warriors, each one requiring a different solution from a different member of the team, are paced with the discipline that the mid-fin sometimes lacked. Jax is the one who gets to the amulet first. And what he has to do to break it is not simply a physical act. The amulet is protected by a ward that responds to physical force by amplifying it back. Essentially, the harder you hit it directly, the stronger it becomes. It is a trap built specifically for strong fighters, for people whose first instinct is to use their power directly. And Jax, the man who has spent the entire film being careful about how he uses his strength, figures out almost immediately that the word cannot amplify what isn't being directed at it. He doesn't attack the amulet, he attacks the foundation beneath it, the structural support that holds it in place. He brings it down indirectly, using precision rather than force. And the amulet shatters not because it was struck, but because the thing holding it up ceased to exist. Here's what this detail is actually doing. It is the film's thematic statement about Shao Kahn delivered to action rather than dialogue. The Emperor cannot be defeated by meeting his power with more power. He cannot be overcome on his own terms. You have to undercut the structure that supports him, the ideology, the fear, the accumulated weight of conquest that makes everyone around him treat his dominance as inevitable. The amulet scene and the film's broader political metaphor are the same scene. It is well constructed. Most people don't notice it on the first watch, but it will hit differently now. The moment the amulet shatters, two things happen simultaneously. Raiden, in the temple where Shang Tsung has been holding him, the sorcerer having subtly drained the Thunder God's power over the course of the film, weakening him as part of Khan's contingency plan, suddenly regains his full strength. And Jing Han's Shang Tsung has what can only be described as a moment of terrible clarity. He recognizes in an instant the amulet's power is severed, that every advantage he has been holding was borrowed, that he was never the hidden mastermind, he was always the leverage point. And Raiden dispatches him with a definitiveness that the film plays as almost anticlimactic. The sorcerer who has been steaming across two fames, who has manipulated and measured and positioned himself throughout, is removed in seconds once the conditions that sustained him are gone. It is brutal, it is appropriate, and it contains a truth about a certain type of operator, the person who succeeds entirely through exploiting others' power and has nothing of their own when that power is removed. That the film delivers without commentary because it trusts the audience to feel the weight of it. Now comes the finale that the film has been building toward from its very first frame, Kitana versus Shao Kahn. By the time they face each other, the dynamics of the fight have fundamentally shifted. The amulet is gone. Shao Kahn is mortal, still enormously powerful, still formidable, but mortal in the way that matters most. He can be beaten, he can be ended. And Kitana is the person standing in front of him, having fought through the fortress, having watched Jade make the choice that broke the last illusion about who Shao Kahn's power actually served, having carried the weight of an entire childhood of enforced loyalty to the man who murdered her father. Adeline Rudolph in this sequence is extraordinary. I said this in the earlier section of this video and I want to return to it here in full detail because the spoiler context allows us to understand exactly why. Everything Rudolph has been doing throughout this film, the restraint, the precision, the careful management of Kitana's emotional expression, has been building toward this moment. Because the film's emotional logic requires that when Kitana finally lets go of the control she has been maintaining since childhood, it has to feel like a dam breaking rather than a decision being made. It has to be inevitable, and Rudolph achieves this through the most specific physical performance detail. The hands, watch Kitana's hands throughout the film. In her scenes with Shao Kahn, they are always still, deliberately, almost unnaturally still. Even when the rest of her body is in motion, when she is fighting or training or demonstrating her abilities, her hands at rest are motionless in a way that reads as suppression. As someone who has learned to hold herself completely in check, as someone who knows that the smallest betrayal of feeling will be noted and used against her. And then in the final confrontation, there is a moment, just before she makes her move, when her hands tremble. Once, briefly, and then stop. And that tremble is the only piece of vulnerability she allows herself before the performance ends and the truth begins. It is a magnificent invisible performance detail. It is the kind of thing that exists in films made by people who genuinely care about what they're doing. The fight itself is not the longest in the film, it is the most purposeful. Shao Kahn without the amulet is still Shao Kahn. He is still enormous, still brutal, still a champion who has defeated 10 realms in single combat. But he is, for the first time, fighting someone who does not believe he is unconquerable. And that distinction is everything. The entire tournament mythology hinges on the psychological weight of Shao Kahn's legend. The amulet was not just power, it was a symbol. And without the symbol, the emperor is just a very large man who has been winning fights for a very long time. Kitana has been trained by him. She knows his patterns better than anyone alive. She knows the moments where his reach creates vulnerability. She knows that the warhammer he carries everywhere is a tool and also a habit, that he defaults to it even when subtlety would serve him better, because he has spent so long needing to assert his dominance visually that he has forgotten how to fight without performing. The finisher is not just a fan service moment, though it is that as well. When Kitana performs what the games would call a fatality, using her fan blades with a precision and a completeness that removes the threat with absolute finality, the film holds on the aftermath in a way that is carefully, deliberately not triumphant. This is not a celebration. The score does not swell. The camera does not cut to the faces of relieved allies. It stays with Kitana, alone, in the silence after something permanent, and what Rudolph does with that silence. The way her posture changes, very slowly, as though the weight she has been carrying for 20 years is leaving her body gradually rather than all at once. The way her eyes move from the defeated Shao Kahn to somewhere far beyond him, as though she is looking for something that isn't in this room, is the finest moment in the film. It is what a great actor does when a great director gives them the space to do it. Jade's arrival after the fight and her alignment with Kitana in its aftermath completes the emotional arc of that relationship. The conversation between them is quiet and short, and it says everything. Jade tells Kitana something to the effect that she has been waiting for this since the beginning. That loyalty was never owed to the thing that took them. It was owed to each other. The film does not linger here. It does not need to. Rudolph and Gabrielle have done enough work in the quieter scenes earlier in the film that this moment of reunion carries its full weight without needing elaboration. The resolution is intentionally, specifically bittersweet. Let me account for exactly who survives and who does not, because the film makes choices here that matter for the third chapter. Shao Kahn is dead, beheaded definitively by Kitana. Shang Tsung is dead, dispatched by Raiden. The revenant threats are neutralized, at least for now, the warriors restored to death when the Netherrealm conduit is severed by Quan Chi's own defeat. Raiden is alive but diminished. The power Shang Tsung drained from him over the film's duration is not immediately returned, and the Thunder God who faces the aftermath of the tournament is noticeably less than the one who began it. Liu Kang is alive, but barely, and in a condition that the film is deliberately ambiguous about. There are burns, there is an implication that something fundamental has shifted in how his abilities work, and the final shot of Liu Kang is not of a champion at peace but of someone who has been through something he is still processing. Jax is alive and largely whole, though carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who has fought at their absolute limit and won. Sonya is alive, bloodied, precisely herself. Cole Young is dead. This is the film's firmest and most costly statement of intent. It is permanent in the way that genre films rarely allow their main characters to be. The funeral is brief and honest. No speeches, no flashbacks, just the people who remain, standing with what remains. And here is the detail that sets up the third film, and that most people miss because it arrives in the final 2 minutes of the story proper, before the credits. Kitana standing with Sonia and Johnny in the aftermath. These three, the survivors of the inner circle, makes a promise. She tells them that the warriors who died in service of Earthrealm, the ones pulled into the Netherrealm as revenants, or simply taken by the tournament's costs, are not permanently out of reach. The Netherrealm has rulers and laws like every realm, and those laws can be navigated by the right fighter. She will go. She will find a way to bring them back, not as revenants but as themselves. It is not a promise made with certainty, it is a promise made with determination, which is the only kind worth making in this world. This sets up the third film in the trilogy with the clarity and the moral urgency that the franchise has never previously achieved. The stakes of the next chapter are not the survival of Earthrealm, that battle has been won. The stakes are the retrieval of the fallen, the reclamation of the people the tournament cost. The question of whether victory in this world is ever truly complete, or whether every winning still carries the dead with it until someone goes back to settle the account. That is a remarkable premise for a third chapter in a fighting game franchise. Whether the film delivers on it is a question for another day and another box. But the foundation it has built here is real. The post-credit scene, yes, there is one, and it matters considerably. After the main titles, in a sequence that reportedly took multiple watches for some audience members to catch the significance of, we see Quan Chi. Not dead, or rather, not fully gone. The necromancer who pulled others from the Netherrealm is himself now in it, but the film shows him there not as a defeated villain consigned to oblivion, but as someone who is already working, already moving through the Netherrealm's architecture with the specific purposefulness of someone who knows what resources are available in the realm of the dead and how to use them. The implication is unmistakable. Quan Chi was always operating in both realms simultaneously. His presence in the Netherrealm is not a punishment. It is a homecoming, and the warriors Kitana is coming to retrieve are already presumably known to him. The ground of the third chapter is being laid not just by the heroes but by the villain who has been preparing it all along. Damon Herriman plays this brief post-credits beat with the subtlety of someone who understands that less is more in a setup scene. There is no dialogue, there is no exposition. There is just Quan Chi in the Netherrealm, surrounded by the evidence of his own expertise, looking at something the camera deliberately does not show us, and then darkness. It is a perfect tease, not because it tells us what happens next, but because it confirms that the thing coming next is already in motion, already prepared, already patient in the way that genuinely dangerous things always are. Hidden details. Let me give you the ones worth looking for on a rewatch. Because this film, more than the 2021 original, has embedded specific visual details that reward attention. The first is the dragon marking. In the 2021 film, the dragon marking the Arcana indicator was a central plot device. Characters with the marking had the capacity for supernatural fighting abilities. In this film, the marking is used more subtly. Watch the skin of characters in close-up shots during the early tournament rounds. Specifically, watch for the moment in the second round where Johnny Cage's marking becomes briefly, faintly visible on his forearm during a punch, not glowing, not activated, just present like something beginning to wake up. This detail is easy to miss because it appears in a 2-second shot in the middle of an action sequence and the film does not call attention to it. But it is there, and it tells you 20 minutes before the film confirms it explicitly that Johnny's Arcana has been with him the entire time. The second is Jade. Watch Jade in every scene she shares with Shao Kahn before her defection. The film has been careful to position her always slightly to Kitana's left, a positioning that reads visually as protective rather than decorative. In every formal scene with Khan, Jade is oriented in a way that puts her body between Kitana and the Emperor. It is not acknowledged in dialogue, it is not even particularly obvious. But on a rewatch, knowing what Jade ultimately does, it recontextualizes every scene she's in. She has been protecting Kitana since before she was willing to protect herself. The third is the DVD titles in the Johnny Cage convention scene. I mentioned this earlier, but let me be specific now. 3 of the 5 visible DVD titles in that scene reference obliquely specific fighting techniques that Johnny will use in the tournament. One of them, a title involving the word split, is an almost impossibly on the nose preview of the Baraka fight's most famous beat. Whether this is intentional or coincidence is the kind of question that the internet will debate for months. I choose to believe it is intentional because Jeremy Slater is a careful enough screenwriter to do exactly this kind of thing and say nothing about it in interviews. The fourth hidden detail is in the Revenant design. Look at the costuming of Revenant Kung Lao versus Living Kung Lao. The iconic razor-edged hat, Kung Lao's most distinctive weapon, is pleasant on the Revenant, but it is worn slightly differently. Living Kung Lao wears the hat tilted forward at an angle that reads as aggressive as the weapon it is. The Revenant wears it flat, level. The weapon is still there. But the intention behind it, the personalized fighting philosophy, the specific angle that was Kung Lao's individual signature is gone. The Revenant is Kung Lao trained of himself, and the production design team encoded that loss in a single degree of hat tilt. That is filmmaking operating at the level of genuine craft. The fifth detail is about the amulet itself and what it looks like. Several critics and fans have noted correctly that the amulet's visual design incorporates elements from multiple realms' iconography simultaneously. There is Iranian symbolism in the metalwork around its edges. There are nether-realm runes in the carvings along its face. There are outward architectural motifs in the way the central stone is mounted. The amulet is not just an outward artifact. It is a convergence point, something that was built from pieces of the realms Shao Kahn has already conquered, quite literally constructed out of the materials of his previous victories. The visual language of its design tells you what the dialogue tells you later, that Shao Kahn's immortality is built on the accumulated cost of everyone he has already destroyed. He is wearing his conquests. He is powered by them, and when the amulet breaks, it is not just a plot mechanism, it is the dismantling of a monument built from stolen things. The host's reaction to the ending. I'll be honest with you about where I landed after the credits. I sat with it for a moment before I moved. Not because I was overwhelmed, though there are genuine emotional peaks in the final 30 minutes that earn that kind of response, but because the film had done something that not many blockbusters are willing to do. It had looked at the concept of winning and refused to make it simple. It had taken a cast of characters who deserved better than generic survival and given some of them genuinely costly endings. It had set up a third chapter, not with a threat but with an obligation, not with an enemy arriving but with a debt unpaid and a promise made. I walked in expecting Mortal Kombat. I got Mortal Kombat, yes. All the fighting, all the blood, all the tournament mechanics the franchise is built on. But I also got something underneath that I wasn't entirely prepared for. A film that in its quietest moments understood that the things worth fighting for are usually the things you've already lost, and that the bravest version of hope is not the belief that you will win. It is the willingness to go back and find the people the winning cost you. That is a 6.3 out of 10. And every fraction of that number is honestly earned. So here we are. The box has been opened completely, every layer has been examined, every corner has been turned over and held up to the light. And now it's time for the thing I've been building toward from the very first frame of this breakdown, the honest, complete personal verdict on Mortal Kombat II. Not a number in isolation, not a score dropped without context, a real accounting, the kind you give a film that tried hard, achieved a great deal, fell short in specific ways, and still left you with something worth carrying home. Let me start with the rating itself, because it deserves more than just a number on a screen. 6.3 out of 10. I want to tell you exactly what that means because on this channel, a number without explanation is just noise. A 6.3 is not a dismissal. It is not a near miss. It is the precise score I give a film that occupies a very specific and honestly quite interesting place on the spectrum, a film that is better than its reputation will eventually settle at, worse than its ambitions deserved, and more honest than most of its genre peers ever managed to be. A 6.3 means I watched it completely engaged. I cared about what happened. I had genuine emotional responses to specific moments. I left frustrated by specific missed opportunities, and I would watch it again with someone who hadn't seen it and feel genuinely invested in their reaction to it. What it does not mean is that Mortal Kombat 2 is a failure, because it isn't. It is a film that fails in some of the most interesting ways possible, ways that reveal ambition, ways that show a creative lynching for something they only partially grasp, ways that leave the outline of a better film visible inside the one that actually exists. That kind of honorable failure is more valuable to me as a film lover than a competent film that never reaches for anything it might drop. The 6.3 is also a number in conversation with the 2021 original. The first Mortal Kombat reboot was, in my honest assessment, a film that deserved around a 6.0. Not because it was much worse than the sequel, but because it had fewer interesting ambitions to fail at. It was a film trying to do a smaller thing with competence, and it achieved that smallness reliably. Mortal Kombat 2 is trying to do a larger thing and achieving it partially. The larger attempt produces more genuine highs and more genuine frustrations simultaneously. It is more alive. It is more flawed. And being more alive, even with those flaws, is an improvement. Now, let me tell you exactly who should watch this film and why. Because this is one of the most important things a film critic can do. Not just evaluate a film in the abstract, but tell a specific person whether this specific film is for them. If you are a fan of the Mortal Kombat franchise, specifically, if you played the games in the 1990s arcade era, if Mortal Kombat 2 or Mortal Kombat 3 was part of your childhood, if you have a genuine emotional attachment to characters like Kitana and Johnny Cage and Baraka and Quan Chi and the specific texture of that universe, this film is absolutely unambiguously for you. Not because it is perfect, not because it doesn't make compromises that will frustrate you, but because it clearly, demonstrably loves the thing you love. The production has done its homework. The references are not accidental. The fatalities are performed with the full commitment the games always brought to them. The roster of characters feels like a genuine attempt to deliver a curated experience for someone who has been invested in this world for 3 decades. You will find things in this film that make you feel seen in the specific rare way that adaptation can achieve when it is done with genuine respect for its source material. Go watch it. Go watch it in the cinema if you can still catch it, because the scale of the fortress sequences and the physicality of the fight choreography are built for a large screen and a dark room. If you are someone who came to the Mortal Kombat franchise through the 2021 film, someone who is not a hardcore games fan but who was entertained enough by the first reboot to be curious about where the story goes, this film will serve you well. The sequel does a responsible job of establishing enough context that you don't need deep franchise knowledge to follow the emotional logic of the story. Kitana's arc is legible without knowing the game mythology in detail. Johnny Cage's journey from self-doubt to self-discovery is a universal enough story that it works regardless of whether you know his arcade moveset. And the stakes of the final act, what is lost, what is preserved, what is promised for the future, are emotionally coherent on their own terms. You might miss some of the specific satisfaction that franchise knowledge provides. But the film works as a human story about people in extraordinary circumstances, even without the archaeology. If you are someone who specifically loves character-driven, psychologically complex genre cinema, if your favorite action films are the ones with rich interiority, if you came to Mad Max Fury Road for Furiosa rather than the cars, if you found the John Wick series most compelling when it paused to let its world breathe, Mortal Kombat 2 will give you some of what you want and leave you wanting significantly more. The film has the ingredients for psychological complexity. It has characters with genuinely rich interior lives, Kitana especially, and Johnny Cage in his best moments. It has a mythological framework that is easily capable of supporting genuinely profound storytelling. But it prioritizes action delivery over character depth in ways that will feel like a choice you disagree with. You will find the moments you came for. You will wish those moments were the whole film rather than islands in a larger, more conventional sea. If you are someone who genuinely dislikes action cinema as a form, if spectacle leaves you cold, if choreographed fighting sequences without significant dramatic depth feel like empty calories regardless of how well they are executed, Mortal Kombat 2 will not convert you. This is not the film that demonstrates that action cinema can be everything. This is the film that demonstrates that action cinema, done with craft and commitment and genuine love for its source material, can be considerable. And if considerable is not the category you came to the cinema for, that is a legitimate position. This film is not for you, and that is fine. Not every film is for every person. The important thing is knowing which films are for which people and making that case clearly. There is a fifth category worth addressing: the person who is bringing a 12-year-old who loves the games to their first Mortal Kombat theatrical experience. I want to speak to you directly for a moment because this film carries an R rating that is fully earned. The violence in Mortal Kombat 2 is graphic in the specific way the franchise has always been graphic: theatrical, exaggerated, committed to the specific visual language of the game's fatality system. It is not realistic violence. It is not violence designed to disturb or traumatize in the way that genuinely confrontational cinema sometimes deploys. But it is bloody, it is specific, and it is frequent. The rating is not performative. If the young person in your life is mature enough to handle it and already knows the franchise, it is a shared experience worth having. If you are not sure, trust your knowledge of that specific young person. The film does not apologize for what it is. You should not need to apologize for your attendance decision either way. Now let's talk about format: cinema, streaming, or own it permanently. Which is the right answer for Mortal Kombat 2? Catch it in cinema if you can, but do not panic if you've missed the theatrical window. This film is one of those cases where the theatrical experience is the ideal but not the only good one. The big screen adds something real to the fortress sequences and the climactic confrontation. The scale of Martyn Ford's physical presence, in particular, is something that shrinks slightly on even a large home screen. The sound design in the tournament fights is built for a theatrical audio environment, and the low end, the percussion of heavy hits, the specific sonic weight of Shao Kahn's warhammer, is doing genuine emotional work that home systems struggle to fully replicate. If you can see it in the cinema, see it there. See it on the biggest format available to you. If you are streaming it and this film will arrive on a streaming platform within the standard theatrical window, likely within 3 to 4 months of its May 8 release, then watch it at home in the conditions that best replicate that kind of experience: large screen, good sound, darkness, and crucially, watch it twice. The first watch will give you the story and the spectacle. The second watch, knowing what you know about the hidden details I outlined in the spoiler section, will give you the film that exists underneath the surface. The rewatch value here is genuine and specific. The visual details the production team embedded in the costuming, the staging, the framing of key scenes. These are not random. They are a conversation the film is having with attentive viewers, and that conversation is worth having. As for owning it permanently, if you are a franchise fan, yes, this is the kind of film that belongs in a collection alongside the 2021 original, because what you are building when you own both is the first two-thirds of a story that is clearly going somewhere interesting. When the third film arrives, and Jeremy Slater's return to the screenplay, confirmed at New York Comic Con in October 2020, suggests that the creative vision for the conclusion of this trilogy is already taking shape. You will want to be able to return to the details of this second chapter with the knowledge of how the story eventually lands. Films that function as middle chapters in planned trilogies tend to improve retroactively. The Empire Strikes Back was not the audience favorite of the original Star Wars trilogy on release. Mortal Kombat II may be a film that, when the trilogy is complete, turns out to have been the most carefully constructed chapter of the three. I am not predicting that it will be. I am suggesting that it is built with enough structural intentionality that it is possible. Let me give you one final thought about this film before I close the box. One thing that I keep coming back to, that I think explains both the film's appeal and its limitations in a single observation. Mortal Kombat II is a film made by people who love the thing they are making. That sounds like it should be automatic. It isn't. The history of video game adaptations is littered with films made by people who respected the IP, understood its commercial value, saw its narrative potential, and yet never quite loved it. Never quite understood why the specific fans who grew up with it felt about it the way they felt. The 1995 Mortal Kombat film, for all its campiness and its low budget and its practical limitations, was made by people who understood what the games felt like to play, the energy of them, the specific joy of them, the way they existed in a particular moment in arcade culture that meant something to an entire generation. And that love came through, even imperfectly, even through the cheese and the dated effects and the poor W.S. Anderson of it all. Mortal Kombat 2226 has that same quality. Simon McQuaid loves these characters. Jeremy Slater loves the mythology. Karl Urban clearly spent time understanding why Johnny Cage mattered enough to generations of players that his absence from the 2021 film was one of the most discussed creative decisions of that reboot. Andeline Rudolph's preparation for Kitana was reportedly exhaustive. The physical training, the study of the character's arc across multiple game timelines, the specific way she holds her fan blades at rest. This is not a cast and crew who showed up for a paycheck. This is a production that cared. And caring in this industry, in this genre, in this moment of franchise fatigue and sequel skepticism and algorithmic entertainment, caring is not nothing. Caring is in fact quite rare, and the reason that Mortal Kombat 2000 lands at 6.3 rather than something lower is precisely because you can feel that care in every moment where the film is working. The Raiden and Cage conversation, the stillness before Kitana's final act, the way Urban holds the silence after the Revenant Kano fight, the tremble in Rudolph's hands, the amulet that is built from stolen things, the dragon marking that appears 20 minutes before the film acknowledges it. These are not accidents. These are the fingerprints of people who gave a genuine damn. The film's limitations are real. They are specific, and I have named them honestly. The pacing problems in the second act, the underdevelopment of Sindel, the administrative feel of Cole Young's ending, the fortress logic that requires you to not think too hard. These are not minor issues. They cost the film the points between a 6.3 and an 8. They are the difference between a film that is genuinely great and a film that is genuinely good with a great film visible inside it. And that gap between what exists and what could have existed is the most honest expression of how I feel about Mortal Kombat 2. It is a box that was worth opening. It had more inside it than most people will expect, and it left enough inside it, still sealed, still waiting, to make the next box the most interesting one of all. 6.3 out of 10. Every point of that number earned. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. And that right there is where I want to pause for just a moment before we close out completely, because I realize that over the course of this breakdown, we have covered an enormous amount of ground together. We went behind the lens before we went inside the story. We walked through the production history, the SAG-AFTRA strike that interrupted filming, the deliberate structural decisions that shaped every layer of this sequel. We felt the first watch energy, that tonal whiplash between the solemnity of Edenia and the gloriously oversized comedy of Johnny Cage's fictional movie career. We walked through the story beat by beat, not just describing what happened, but asking why it happened and what it means that it happened that way. We sat with the things this film does brilliantly: Karl Urban's quietly extraordinary performance, Adeline Rudolph's physical and emotional precision, the thematic intelligence of the amulet sequence, the production design that makes the fortress feel like an extension of Shao Kahn's psychology rather than just a location. We named the failures honestly: Sindel's wasted potential, the second act pacing, Cole Young's underserved ending, the fortress logic that requires a certain generosity from the viewer. We went deep into the cultural moment this film arrived into. The critical and audience divide. The franchise context that explains why a 64% on Rotten Tomatoes still represents genuine forward momentum for a series that has been trying to find its footing on screen for 3 decades. We found the deeper layer, the film about power and identity, and the question of whose definition of your worth you have been carrying without examining it. And then we went into full spoilers, all the way to the end, all the way through the post-credit scene, all the way through the hidden details that reward the second watch and change how the first watch feels in retrospect. That is what this channel does. That is what the film box has always been about. Not a summary, not a review you could read in 45 seconds. A genuine, thorough, honest, layered opening of a film that deserves to be understood from the inside out rather than judged from the outside in. And I want to say something directly to you, the person who watched this entire breakdown, who stayed through all of it, who cared enough about this film, or about film in general, to go this deep with me. That is not something I take for granted. In a world where attention is the most competed over resource there is, the fact that you chose to spend this much of yours here with this conversation in this space, that means something real to me. This channel exists because of that choice. Every video I make is a bet that there are people out there who want more than the surface of a story, who want to understand not just what they watched, but why it made them feel what they felt, who want to be the kind of film lover who sees more than what's on screen. And you staying here all the way through this breakdown is proof that that bet is right. So genuinely, from one film lover to another, thank you. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer this in the comments because I read them. Everyone, not as a performance, not as a content strategy, because real conversation about film is one of the things that makes this worth doing, and the comments section of this channel is one of the places where that conversation actually happens. Here is the question, and I have thought carefully about this one because I wanted to generate a real discussion rather than just a quick yes or no. Cole Young, his ending in this film, do you think it was the right creative decision? A bold storytelling choice that signals this franchise is serious about consequence and cost? Or do you think it was a failure of nerve in the opposite direction, the film using a character's death as a shortcut to emotional weight it hadn't fully earned? I have given you my honest view on this already. I think it is both things simultaneously, that it is brave in its willingness to make the sacrifice permanent and insufficient in its execution of the moment itself. But I am genuinely curious whether the people who loved the first film, who spent 3 years with Cole as the entry point into this universe, feel the same way or feel something entirely different. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you actually felt when that moment arrived, not what you think you should have felt. What you actually felt. Because that gap between what you thought you would feel and what you actually felt is often the most interesting information a film gives us about itself. And while you're down there, if you got value from this breakdown, if any single moment in this video made you see the film differently or think about it in a way you hadn't before, or even if you just appreciated spending time in a space where film is taken seriously, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, it takes 1 second, and for a channel like this one, it is genuinely meaningful in practical terms. The algorithm does not automatically surface long-form, in-depth film analysis to the people who would most value it. Every like tells it to try harder. Every like is a vote for the kind of film content that goes beyond the obvious, that trusts the audience to want depth, that refuses to treat film lovers like they need everything simplified and accelerated. If that's the kind of content you want more of, and I think it is, or you wouldn't still be here, then that button is how you say so. And if you haven't subscribed yet, genuinely, what are you doing? Subscribe. Because this channel is not going anywhere. We are just getting started. There is a library of breakdowns already here for you. Films that have been waiting to be opened properly. Stories that deserve the full treatment. Endings that need to be explained and examined and held up to the light. And every single week we add another box to the collection. Every single week there is something new to open. Subscribing means you never miss one. And more importantly, it means you are part of the community of people who take film seriously enough to go this deep with it. That is the community this channel is building. And from where I'm standing, it is one of the best communities on this platform. I am proud of every person who is part of it. Now, let me tell you about what's coming next. Because the next video on this channel is one I have been building toward for a long time. It is a film that arrived quietly, without the marketing machinery and the franchise scaffolding that something like Mortal Kombat II brings with it. A film that most people watched once and thought they understood and then thought about for 3 weeks afterward and realized they hadn't understood at all. A film with a final act that has been discussed, debated, reinterpreted, and argued over in comment sections and film forums and late-night conversations among the people who care about this kind of thing. A film where every single surface detail is doing double duty, when nothing you see is only what it appears to be on first viewing, where the architecture of the story is built to feel one way from the outside and reveal something entirely different from within. A film that deserves exactly this kind of treatment. The full box opening. All the layers. No shortcuts. I am not going to tell you the title yet, partly because the tease is more fun, but mostly because when you see the thumbnail and the title in your subscription feed, I want it to land on you with the full weight of the anticipation rather than the slightly diluted version you get when you've been told something is coming. What I will tell you is this. If you have been asking for a breakdown of a film that nobody has quite cracked open the right way yet, a film that has been waiting for someone to go deep enough into it to find what's actually living at its center, that is the next video. And it is going to be worth the wait. Stay subscribed. Turn on notifications if you want to be the first person to know when it drops, because this one is going to land differently. One more thing before we close. And this is something I want to say to anyone who found this channel through this specific video, through the Mortal Kombat 2 breakdown specifically. Maybe because you just watched the film and wanted to go deeper with it. Maybe because a friend sent this to you. Maybe because the algorithm finally did its job correctly for once. Welcome genuinely warmly without any of the generic welcome to my channel energy that usually accompanies those words. Welcome to a place that was built specifically for you, for the person who watches a film and immediately wants to talk about it, who sits in the dark after the credits roll and turns something over in their mind and wonders what they just experienced, who feels like most film conversation happens at a level too shallow to get to the real thing. This is the real thing. Or at least this is the attempt at it. Every video is the attempt. Some attempts hit closer to the center than others. Some films give you more to work with than others. But the commitment is always the same. Go deeper. Find the layer beneath the obvious layer. Name what the film is actually doing rather than just what it appears to be doing. Trust the audience to stay with the complexity rather than reaching for the shortcut. That is the promise of this channel, and it is the promise I am making to you personally, right now. At the end of this breakdown, if you are choosing to stay, Mortal Kombat II gave us a lot to work with today. It gave us Karl Urban carrying a franchise on his shoulders with genuine joy and genuine craft. It gave us Adeline Rudolph doing something subtle and precise, and remarkably controlled with one of the most beloved characters in the franchise's mythology. It gave us the specific, layered tragedy of Quan Chi's Revenant program as a metaphor for institutional violence and the ways power hollows people out and points them against the things they once loved. It gave us the amulet built from stolen things and the structural insight that some forms of dominance can only be dismantled indirectly, that you cannot defeat what holds itself up by hitting it where it presents itself as strongest. It gave us Cole Young's death, imperfect in its execution, honest in its consequence. It gave us Tate choosing Kitana over survival. It gave us Johnny Cage discovering that clarity under pressure is a form of power that no arcana can manufacture. It gave us a post-credit scene that confirms the third chapter is not just coming, it is already in motion, already patient, already building in the dark. It gave us a story about whose definition of your worth you have been accepting without permission. It gave us a film that loved its source material enough to be held accountable by it. And that is rarer than it should be. And it gave us, here on this channel, the opportunity to do what we always do. Open the box, go all the way in, find out what's really inside. 6.3 out of 10. Mortal Kombat II 2026. In cinemas now. I'll see you in the next one. Every film is a box. And we've only just started opening them. That's the film box. See you in the next one.